I'm Jeremy Rosen. I'm the acting director of the Tanner Humanities Center and associate professor of English. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to our Tanner Humanities Center Author Meets Readers series with Azar. The Tanner Humanities Center aims to advance humanities exploration and engagement through academic research, educational enrichment, and public outreach. This year marks the center's 35th anniversary, and we're grateful to the Tanner family's multi-generational commitment to the center and its work. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the university's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. To this last point, we are thrilled to be hosting former U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, a member of the Muskogee Nation, on October 6th, that's 2 weeks from today, at Kingsbury Hall, as well as Indigenous philosopher and environmental justice scholar Kyle White, who is a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, on April 4th. I also want to thank the organizations and individuals who made this event possible: the R. Harold Burton Foundation, the College of Humanities, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at the U, the King's English Bookshop, Marriott Library, O.C. Tanner, the Office of the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, PEN America Utah, more on PEN in a minute, Salt Lake City Arts Council, Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Program, and Utah Humanities. I also would be remiss if I didn't say a word about the outstanding Tanner Humanities Center staff, especially Beth James, the Associate Director, and Susan Anderson, Development Officer, who do so much to bring these events into being. Thank you. We've planned today's event to coincide with Banned Books Week, and I'd now like to welcome Paisley Rechtel, Distinguished Professor of English and the co-chair of the Utah chapter of PEN America, to come up and say a few words.
Thank you very much. This week is, of course, Banned Books Week, if you know that, the 18th to the 22nd. This is one of PEN America's events that takes place annually. PEN America stands at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the United States and worldwide. We champion the freedom to write, recognizing the power of the word to transform the world. Our mission is to unite writers and their allies to celebrate creative expression and defend the liberties that make it possible. PEN America works to ensure that people everywhere have the freedom to create literature, to convey information and ideas, to express their views, and to access the views, ideas, and literature of others. Our strength is our membership, a nationwide community of more than 7,500 novelists, journalists, nonfiction writers, editors, poets, essayists, playwrights, publishers, translators, agents, my lord, as well as devoted readers and supporters who join with them to carry out PEN America's mission. So we have a free expression program that defends writers and journalists and protects free expression rights in the United States and around the world. This work includes research and reports on topical issues ranging from fraudulent news to censorship in China, advocacy internationally and in the United States in defense of press freedom and on other free expression challenges, and campaigns on policy issues on behalf of individual writers and journalists under threat. PEN now has a Utah chapter, of which I am co-chair, along with Erica George, Tanner Humanities Center Director. Many of you are aware of Alpine School District's recent decision to remove the e-version of 52 books by 41 authors, many of which are revered, best-selling, award-winning, and widely read YA authors that also tackle LGBTQ+ subjects and, of course, not critical race theory. This is based on a deliberate and sweeping misreading of the new Sensitive Materials in Schools law, which states that libraries and school districts can review and immediately remove literature that the adult community as a whole would deem uninstructive, including pornographic or harmful materials that would be judged not to have serious value for minors. Challenges such as these have been happening across Utah and will continue to happen without our concerted effort to protect and defend free expression. If you enroll as a PEN member, as a Utah resident, you will automatically be enrolled in the PEN Chapter Alerts e-newsletter program that will give you information about challenges to free expression in our state and what local actions we can take to protect free speech and freedom of information. I hope you will all enroll, and I hope to see you at the future Reading Dangerously events. Thank you.
Thank you, Paisley, for that and the incredibly important work PEN does to preserve free expression here in Utah and nationwide. Now to introduce Azar Nafisi, I'd like to invite to our, up to the stage, or to this part of the stage, let's say, the new Dean of the College of Humanities, an outstanding advocate for literature, the humanities, and the university's mission, Hollis Robbins.
Thank you so much. This is actually my first public event as the dean, and so thank you for the opportunity. My name again is Hollis Robbins, Dean of the College of Humanities, and it's my great privilege to introduce Azar Nafisi, whose timely book, Read Dangerously, The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times, is indeed the right book for our times. I'm going to take a leap and assume that everybody here has heard of Azar Nafisi and at least her award-winning book, Reading Lolita in Tehran, a memoir in books from 2003. Dr. Nafisi was born and raised until age 13 in Tehran, Iran, educated in England, Switzerland, and the United States, receiving her PhD in English and American Literature from the University of Oklahoma in 1979, defending this dissertation 2 days after which she returned to Iran, and then on the cusp of revolution, the revolution that overthrew the Shah and ushered in an era of dramatic and dangerous change for women, for universities, and for the country. Reading Lolita in Tehran spent over 100 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, sold untold tens of thousands of copies, maybe 100,000 of copies? Could be. Millions of copies. Untold millions of copies. And, as any good book should, provoked some controversy about the representation of the era, the place, and the privileging of canonical Western literature. It is ever the role of canonical literature to produce controversy. And we should note, too, that controversy plays a role in producing and suppressing canonical works of literature. I thought of this in reading the chapter on James Baldwin in Read Dangerously, since Baldwin's 1948 essay, Everybody's Protest novel, arguably suppressed the teaching of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin for almost half a century. That's a story for a different time. So there are two kinds of people in the world. Those for whom reading opens up a universe of ideas, and those for whom disallowing those ideas means keeping people from reading. Those of us here today are probably the first sort, and we can never imagine a day in which we'd wake up and say, you know, I was wrong. All that reading, a terrible thing. But all of us hope that those on the other side who fear reading might someday wake up and say, okay, I was wrong. I think I'll give reading a chance. And maybe there's another two kinds of people. Those who spend their time on the front lines of this divide, like our guests this afternoon, and those who don't. And given the fact that converts only go in one direction, I have yet to meet the person who says, yeah, I gave up reading. This is important work. And I'm very privileged to have the chance to hear from you this afternoon. Thank you.
So, Azar, thank you so much for being here today. And it's been really nice. Azar gave a lot of her time to the University of Utah. She met with students yesterday morning over breakfast. She had dinner with a group of us last night. And you're just as generous in person as you are a reader and writer. So I really thank you for being here. I think one of the reasons that so many people really truly love your work is that it interweaves discussion of books with politics with a very personal tone. You write books about books, but they don't have the kind of dry detachment of much literary criticism. And I fear I'm referring to my own writing here as well. So I wanted to begin by asking about the form your new book takes, which is a series of letters to your father. It's an incredibly personal and intimate form. You're talking about books with your father who has passed. And I was wondering if you want to say a little more about why you chose that form.
Well, first of all, I'm so, there we go. Thank you. You see how easy have others do your chores for you? Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Jeremy, personally, and all the wonderful colleagues who helped make this event possible, including Beth James and Susan and Missy, and the Dean, Lady Dean. It is so wonderful when I found out that Penn is going to be joining you. Penn is my absolute favorite organization. And I think that we should all, especially in these times, give it all the support that we can. Now, you asked about how I came to write letters to my father. Since I returned to US in 1997, and after 1 or 2 years, I was becoming more and more frustrated with the way things were going. And almost every book I wrote talks about this frustration to some point. And in 2016, my frustration reached really bad heights, and I didn't know what to do. I was angry all the time. It reminded me of the time I lived in the Islamic Republic, where every morning I would get up with anxiety and fear and anger and outrage. And I was getting that over here. And whenever I get into a mood like this, I take refuge in writing. So I started writing in my diary, and I started writing. I don't know if you guys have read Saul Bellows' Herzog, where he's writing letters to the whole world because his wife has left me. Well, my wife had not left me, but I did feel the necessity to write letters to the whole world. And so I wrote to Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, my father, Donald Trump, and on and on. But I realized that this is good for me to sort of spew out my anger, but it is not good for publication. And the letters were too random. So then I thought, okay, why don't I write these letters to the writers that I choose? But there was a problem with that. It would become too artificial. I mean, dear Margaret Atwood, I love your books. I'm a big fan of yours, And by the way, this is what you said in The Handmaid's Tale. It just didn't work. So I was talking about my frustration with my friend Ladan, and she told me, I said that for your benefit, because you and I are the only ones here who know Ladan and love her, in fact. She said, why don't you write to a third person? And almost immediately my father came to my mind. Shall I explain why my father came? Okay. Now, my father and I had this long history of both in terms of literature and fiction, as well as writing letters to one another. I was only 3.5 when he started telling me bedtime stories. And he was very democratic in telling of the stories. One day he would talk about our epic poet Ferdowsi and the Iranian mythology. The next night we would travel to France with The Little Prince. The next night to England with Alice in Wonderland, to US with Charlotte's Web, to Denmark with Little Match Girl, to my beloved Italy with Pinocchio. So I learned at that age that I can stay in my little room in Tehran and the whole world will come to me. And a lot of these places I saw later, I visited later, first I saw them through the eyes of their nation's imagination. So I had that background with my father. But the first letter he wrote to me, I was only 4. And I couldn't obviously read. No, I wasn't a genius and I couldn't read. But I still have that letter. And he talks about what his own aspirations and how my birth changed his life and what he wants the future to be. Then the first letter I wrote to him, I was 6 years old and I had just learned how to write. And he was studying for his master's degree at the American University, in fact. And on scraps of paper, I would write short notes, signing them Baba, which Baba in Persian means daddy, only a much more intimate than daddy, you know. Your daddy's daughter, love Azar. And he would write me long letters, most of which I didn't understand at all. And in one of the letters, he said, maybe you and I could turn our letters into a book. So I was actually doing what he aspired to do, which we never did. And anyway, this letter writing continued. Even when we were living in the same home, on important occasions, we would write to one another. And we would write about our personal feelings and emotions, but also about the state of the world, politics, literature, everything, you name it. And this trend went on till he died in 2004. So I felt that my relationship with my father was intimate enough to not just write dry letters to somebody there. And at the same time, it allowed me to expand on the ideas that I wanted to talk about. So that is how it all started. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know what's got into me.
That's great. I love it. Well,
would you like some water?
I'm okay right now. One thing that really comes through in that story, I mean, you know, you've had an incredible life and a really challenging life and sort of multiple lives. And one of the things I think really comes through in your books is that political questions are not abstractions. They are not just oppression or injustice or political violence, but you really write about the way that violence or that oppression is felt and fought on the ground of actual human bodies and minds, and the imagination of people. So I was wondering if that for you is kind of at the essence of why you think literature has a kind of subversive power. One of your previous books is called The Republic of the Imagination, and that there's something about literature that sort of speaks to us in an individual manner that, you know, kind of politics as a discipline doesn't get at in the same way.
Yes, exactly. What you say, literature is subversive of politics, but that is not the only role that literature plays. You know, I keep reminding myself that literature, fiction is about truth. And truth is always dangerous. Truth is always insubordinate in terms of our prejudices and the things that we our judgments, and it challenges us constantly. And once you know the truth, then you cannot remain silent. Then you will become complicit. And you notice now, when you read Jane Austen, and I'm using someone that everybody thinks is very conservative, they don't know that lady. She is mischievous to the core, you know. Now, Jane Austen obviously was not preaching to people about individual freedoms, but her stories, every story she writes, is centered around a woman. The plot is centered around a woman. And that woman says no to the dictates of her society. Remember that the society at that time in Europe and in England, women had to marry in order to survive. If you didn't have money, even if you had money, when you married your husband, the money would go to him. And here we have, in Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet, who has no money, and she gets two marriage proposals. One of them, God, to Mr. Darcy, need I say more, you know, and he's very wealthy and he's very handsome and all of that, but she doesn't approve of him. And she says no to both of them. So at the center of these novels, there's a woman who is saying no to the dictates of others and who says, I choose the man that I want to be with. And that is the essence of what Austen does. And that is why Austen is subversive. Now, imagination and ideas are based on two very human traits. One is curiosity. You mentioned, of course, you know, he's a Nabokov scholar, among other things. And we've been talking Nabokov. So I'm reminded of Nabokov's quote about curiosity. He says, curiosity is insubordination in its purest form. Because, you know, curiosity makes you not be formulaic, not to stick to formulas. And curiosity, and Nabokov was both a scientist and a poet and a writer. And he knew that science and literature have a lot in common. And one of the main things they have in common is that curiosity. Science in terms of nature and literature in terms of human psyche. I'm bringing this up because over the past 10 years or so, the students that have been encouraged to not go into humanities or liberal arts, not go into literature or philosophy or history, because, and this is in a democratic society where every single individual should be able to have the best education for free. Now, we have in this society parents and peers who tell you, you won't make enough money with literature. And go into science and technology, not because you love them. I mean, that would make sense. Go to science and technology because you love them. No, go to science and technology because you make more money. This is the democratic ethics. You know, I mean, liberal art colleges, those small colleges that were dispersed around this country, they were the backbone. Education was the backbone of this country. Just read the founders and read those who questioned the founders. Read Frederick Douglass on that. You know, and yet, okay, I vented my outrage. Now I go back and I will finish soon. So curiosity in literature and in art is important because it is always about the other. And I'm mentioning this because at universities, we talk about the other, but we really, a lot of times, do not appreciate genuine otherness and how to deal with it. If you're a great writer, you become a democratic writer. Novels form is a democratic form. It consists of so many different voices. And a great writer goes under the skin of every character and gives every character the right to speak, the right to have a voice. Even the villain has a voice. Even the villain is not dehumanized, you know. So novel is based on this essential understanding of what it means to be human. It constantly brings this question to our attention. What does it mean to be human? And what it means to be human is the miracle, magic of literature and arts, of humanities. And that is empathy. Going genuinely under the skin of others and discovering something new, becoming another Alice in Wonderland, where you ran after that white rabbit without knowing where the white rabbit is going to take you, and jumped down that hole without asking, is this hole going to be bad for me? Where am I going to go? No, you jump into that bloody hole because you want to discover something new. And once you do that in Wonderland, you see all the creatures that you see in real life, but through a different kind of perception. And the novel, like the caterpillar in Alice, when you ask, Alice keeps asking these creatures, who are you? And the caterpillar throws the question back at her, who are you? And the novel does this to us. You ask the novel, who are you? The novel asks you, who are you? You pose yourself as a question mark when you are dealing with novels. So empathy is what makes us survive as human beings, connection. And these are the gifts that humanities, you guys, bring to us guys.
I certainly hope to. I love that image or metaphor of Alice going down into Wonderland and down the rabbit hole as a metaphor for reading. It kind of reminds me of what Dean Robbins was saying, I think, about why so many books are being banned, that seemed to me around a certain kind of fear of what might happen, what might be encountered if you open up the book. I'm also, maybe inappropriate, but Catherine does it well. Catherine Stockton, my colleague, often talks about literature as a kind of sexual encounter that's kind of unprotected. It's kind of dangerous. You don't exactly know what's going to happen. You have to kind of become vulnerable to what happens in that encounter. I digress, but
you should.
I like to. The subtitle of this new book, Read Dangerously, is The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times. I think Dean Robbins was very correct in saying it feels like a book very much for this moment. This feels very much like a troubled time we're in. Maybe it always has, but right now, and this list may rival the PEN membership list, but this is banned Books Week. There are book bans happening here in Utah nationwide. There's, of course, the attack on Salman Rushdie several weeks ago, the Dobbs decision striking down Roe versus Wade, continued BLM protests in the wake of extrajudicial police killings, slow-moving climate catastrophe. Now I'm going to bum you all out. Of course, the efforts of the last president and his supporters to overturn a democratic election. So I'm curious about, in this troubled time, why you think so many parents, school districts, or the organizations that sponsor them are turning their sights on books, and maybe what you think they're afraid of in these books. That is their.
Afraid of change. For the past 22 years since I returned to this country. Oh, I'm sorry. For the past 22 years since I returned to this country, I have noticed this tendency within the society as a whole to want to be comfortable. I mean, how many times a week do you hear the word, I'm not comfortable with this? Well, I mean, sorry, but this is life, you know, and life is not comfortable. I mean, it is sometimes comfortable, but not always, you know, but we want to be always comfortable. And freedom, as Saul Bellow would put it, is an ordeal. Freedom needs to be nurtured every single day. It cannot be taken for granted. And I feel that we took our freedoms and our rights too much for granted. We saw the society going towards this comfort bit, which is the root of book banning and book burning and attacking Salman Rushdie. They don't want to hear the bitter truth. And they, instead of it, they bring hate, they bring polarization. Because all the avenues of communication, one by one, are getting closed, we move towards fear. We are alien to one another, and we have no way of connecting to one another. It is comfortable in the sense that we are always wearing the white hat. You know, totalitarianism has its seductions. It tells you exactly what to do. You don't have to take responsibility for anything. And you're always the good guy. There is always this excuse for a totalitarian mindset. Now, a poet is unruly and is not accepting this and does not make you feel comfortable. So I think we have to remember what Baldwin used to say, that artists are here to disturb the peace, and universities are here to disturb the peace. They're not here to give you comfort pills and grass so that you would not feel the pain. Baldwin says that we hate because we want to evade pain. We need to confront our pain rather than hide from it.
Thank you for that, Azar. I have to ask you, because there's so much in the news right now about what's going on in Iran, about the protests there that were, if you haven't seen, launched by the killing of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman who it seems was beaten to death while in police custody after being arrested for not wearing the hijab properly. What would you like us to know about what's going on in Iran right now, and what do you think these protests illustrate about the political dynamic of the republic?
I'm wondering if people know about the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, I don't need to explain anything about. Well, as you know, when the Islamic Republic came to power, like all totalitarian mindsets, their first targets were women, minorities, and those who worked in culture and universities, in fact. So there has been this fight. I mean, women were at the forefront of the struggle against mandatory veil as early as the first years of revolution. They came into the streets of Tehran and they shouted that freedom is neither Eastern nor Western. Freedom is global, and they demanded freedom. So this fight has been going on over the past 40-something years. People come into the streets or they object. Well, Penn would know you have been defending the writers, and just recently Bahtasha Afkin was killed, died inside the jail. And women. Now, hijab, the veil, for this government is not the religious attire that they claim. it is to impose a uniformity upon the population. If hijab was as popular as the regime claims it to be, why do you have to put people in jail? And now in case of Amini, why do you have to kill them? I mean, this woman's only fault, only crime was that she was without the mandatory veil. Veil, wearing it or not wearing it should depend upon the individual, not upon the state. But they turned the women of Iran into symbols, into symbiotic signs. And now women go into the streets taking off their hijab. A mother and a daughter got 16 years in jail for not wearing their hijab. Nasrin Sotoudeh, a human rights lawyer for women and children, got 37 years for supporting them. And now people are being killed. While people are being killed, women in Iran are going and creating bonfires and throwing their hijabs into the fire. And the regime, according to BBC Persian, I think 30-something people have already been killed. We're very worried about the trend here because, again, BBC, I think it was reported that the militia are coming into the cities. Most major cities in Tehran, there are protests right now going on because of this girl's murder. And you got to help, you got to support. Iranian people, for the past 40 years, have been fighting for their right to live decently and with integrity. Every single right that you in the United States respect, they are demanding and they're giving their lives for it. But over here in the West, from right and the left, what do we hear? We hear them say it's their culture. What is our culture? When these guys came to power, they reduced the age of marriage for females from 18 to 9. They brought something that had never existed in Iran, the punishment of stoning people to death for what they called prostitution and adultery. But then they have temporary marriages where a man can rent a woman from 5 minutes to 99 years and have as many rented women as possible. This, if I tell my American friends, and I myself being an American, I tell them, if this is our culture, if compulsory hijab, not voluntary dressing, is our culture, then slavery and lynching and with the burning witches in Salem is the culture of this country, not its great writers and thinkers and philosophers. If this is our culture, then Inquisition and fascism and communism is the culture of Europe, because every nation has something to be afraid of. But you cannot reduce American culture to just slavery and lynching. You have to also mention the struggles, the bloody struggles that have gone on against it to this day as we speak here. And you have to go behind the democratic movements across the world. And Iran is the best example of the fight for democracy. And yet it's being ignored mainly in democratic countries. I'm sorry, I get a little. Shall I give you the?
I can tell you get upset. You've been upset today, and for good reason. It's very scary to see what's going on in the streets there, and also somewhat hopeful to see the women who were putting their lives on the line to protest right now. Well, you really actually kind of answered with my last question, which was going to be a little bit about some of your critics and the perception that you perpetuate a kind of Orientalist narrative of the kind of problems in the Islamic world. And it's what you're saying, it sounds like to me, is that you're not critiquing Islam or the Islamic world in anything so in such broad terms. You're critiquing certain practices that restrict the rights of people to choose their lives and how they live them. So that's you sort of preempted my last question. I really am also just struck by your comments about both Iran and the United States. And I think the idea that we take certain rights for granted. You were talking with some of our human rights students yesterday about just basic rights to choose or to read what you want or how you would want. I do want to leave some time for audience questions. So we have a couple of roving mics, I believe. And if there are some questions from the audience, we'd be happy to take them right now.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Nafisi. First, I have an announcement. Today in front of Utah State Capitol at 5 p.m. There will be protests in support of Iranian women, so please join if you can. And so my question is actually in line of what Jeremy said at the end. I think one of the reasons that Western people are very cautious about talking with these kind of things that are happening in Iran is because they don't want to be accused of Islamophobia. But I was wondering, do you have any answers to those kind of people that would think that if people are burning their scarves in Iran or they're protesting against compulsory hijab, it's maybe kind of Islamophobia or, I don't know, supporting that kind of belief. So I was wondering if you have any ideas about it. Thank you.
Yes, you can be accused of Islamophobia. Obviously, you can, especially the Islamic Republic loves it because, if everything that the Iranian people want now, first of all, don't listen to me. Just go and find out for yourselves what the Iranian people are asking for. And they are saying that the freedoms they're asking, they are the ones who are throwing their hijabs into the fire, not me. I'm sitting here having a lot of fun with you guys, So Islamophobia has become a way of shutting up people regarding the regimes and groups that are that have the most extreme interpretation of Islam. By the way, the Islamic Republic not only kills and jails the minorities, especially the Baha'i minority, that right now they go into the homes of the minorities, Baha'is, they throw their furniture and belongings out, and they then raise their homes to the ground. This is going on right now. Now, if everything that I ask for the Iranian people, and that is their freedom to live with dignity and integrity, if that is Islamophobia, it shows that kind of reasoning is the most Orientalist reasoning that I have ever heard, because it assigns to the West everything that is good and democratic. When they say you can't, you like to be Western, what do they mean? what is it that they mean? That I want to have freedom of expression, that I want to have freedom of association, that I want to read and write and dance and sing and do the things that I want to do without the state coming and taking me to jail. So we have to fight this mythology. It is not good for religion itself. This religion has been confiscated, and it is the victim here. We cannot allow just one interpretation of Islam be the only interpretation. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I say something very fast. Both extreme right and extreme left love this kind of reasoning. People like Trump and on the right, who are the dominant ones now, it's not the left that is dominant, it's the right that is. They come and say, these Muslims, they are a bunch of barbarians. Look at the way they treat their women. Look at the way they don't talk about the other kind of Muslims that exist also and that I have experienced throughout my life. And they say that we shouldn't let them in. They're dangerous. We should kick them out. That is one interpretation. The other interpretation is it's their culture. Let's not impose our culture on theirs. Who are you to think that you're so high and mighty that by criticizing Islam, you are, that form of Islam, you are imposing your culture on me? Why don't you think that I impose my culture on you? If you think I'm equal. So these justifiers of the Islamic Republic are the worst kind of Orientalists, because Orientalists, now that's another story. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm sorry, this gets me because look at the way it shows the people of the Muslim people around the world. A bunch of barbarians, people who marry a 9-year-old girl. That is what they want the world to know about Islam. Oh.
Much of Rushdie's Shame right now,
Yeah.
where the girl becomes a werewolf and sort of takes revenge. He also says that when you get rid of one mythology, you need another. And he says,
you know that Shame's won the best state award for translation in Iran.
In Iran, yes, yeah. I remember reading that. We have time maybe for another question from the audience. There is one. Yes. Go ahead, Gat.
Why don't both of you? I'll respond to both, so it would be shorter.
Hello. Okay. Shanaz. In our society, we see extreme polarization, not just in the U.S., but all around the globe. So like right versus left, east versus west, etc. How do you hope that we break?
How do we break down the extreme polarization?
How do we do it? Oh, God. That's another session. But since you talk, by the way, those two girls sitting there, I had one of the most beautiful experiences of my that I haven't had in a long time. And that was the class you organized, where we had an amazing discussion, and it reminded me how much we owe our youth, how much we owe them, and we better come for them now because we have been amiss. Now, it will take forever, and I'm sure you don't want to listen to me forever, to respond to your question. First of all, I think by not being like them. That is what Baldwin was most afraid of, that he becomes like his enemy. And that is what I'm most afraid of. I'm not afraid of the enemy without. I'm afraid of the enemy within, because I myself have felt the same kind of hatred. And I know how poisonous that hatred is. So that is to begin with. then your attitude becomes so that you do not dehumanize them. And you can create channels of discussion. I wish all across this country we had little communities where we discuss these matters. You know, I know this is not a good answer, but that right now is the only answer I have.
So one thing in the novel that you highlighted a lot was you talked about the need for extreme compassion as you face extreme violence. I think we can access that within ourselves, if that makes sense. Like, sometimes it can be difficult when faced. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not used to
Okay, how we can get past this extreme hatred for the other and have compassion instead.
Well, you know, one thing that I was talking to Jeremy about it, that the people I want to hate or do hate actually, I really, it is very difficult, but I try to humanize them in one way or another, because I realize how much I become dehumanized. You know, this is a very tricky part. We are living in a time of crisis, and this time of crisis is always a time of transition. We can go either way. We can either go to the way of more democracy, more freedoms, or regress, like Roe versus Wade. I mean, you know, regress into a past that we're not very fond of. My only thing here, I'm very bad at giving advice. I can't do it, but my only hope is that we go for understanding before we go for judgment. Even if you want to defeat them, you have to know them. You have to understand them.
Yes, you say in the book, we've lost the art of engaging with the opposition.
Yes.
Engage
with the opposition. You know that you have to know about Mein Kampf because you don't want Holocaust to happen again. So you need to know. And ignorance is what is dominating this country today. People are proud of their ignorance. Remember Gestapo, Gazpacho? Wonton. So ignorance is not bliss.
Maybe one more?
Hi. So it sounded to me like I don't want to read between the lines too much, but maybe you have a complicated relationship with democracy, in that you mentioned that it was through the democratic process that education in at least the United States is not made a priority, but it's also the democratic countries that give asylum to people fleeing totalitarian regimes, and also are bastions of liberalism. So I'm wondering if you might say more about your understanding of, or that relationship that democracy has to serve the humanities, but also to not always serve the humanities, like education and stuff.
So he asked if you have a complicated relationship with democracy, because democracies give shelter to the fleeing totalitarian governments, but democracies here have also started to ban books.
Yes, I don't want to glorify democracy. I think it's very dangerous. The whole point is that democracy is always in the making. It is never something that you have and then you sit back and say, I'm forever, living in a democracy. So there will always be these crises, and there will always be faults and regress, and sometimes we lose. Sometimes a democracy is turned into a totalitarian state. And that is why we need educated, knowledgeable citizens who know why this country was built and what they want.
So I think that's a beautiful note on which to end, the idea that democracy is in progress, that we need to keep working for it. It's coincides with something you said to me yesterday, which is that we defenders of reading and the humanities really need to be on the offensive. We can't always be on the defensive, trying to protect what we have. We have to go out there and advocate for what we do, why books are important, why freedom of expression and conversation is so necessary. I think that's a good note on which to bring up for just a brief moment Jonathan Friedman, who is from PEN America. Jonathan is, I have your title somewhere, Director of Free Expression and Education Programs at PEN America.
Thank you so much. Really close. All right. Hi. Well, I am so sorry that my flight from New York has meant that I'm closing the event and not opening it, but the majority of it I did catch, and just incredible. Thank you so much. I am here to say a word about book bans and public education and going on the offensive. I have tracked for the past year educational gag orders, bills to stop teachers from doing their work. I have tracked book bans around the country. I have tracked all kinds of educational censorship that are taking place in schools. And what I can tell you is that the number of book bans and the number of bills are a sliver of the story of what is really happening. Increasingly, many schools are taking to removing extracurricular programs. I've seen bans on LGBTQ pride flags, and I've had students, LGBTQ youth, write to me when we say, oh, here's a book ban happening in somewhere in the country, in a school district that I've never been to. And I have people from that community who write me and say, can you help us? I've had just an incredible outpouring of requests for help and stories. So what I ask all of you to do, if you can, is please stand up with us, get involved, stay aware. As we are tracking from afar, and you find out about things that are happening here, help us find out. Help local journalism cover these issues. Help people understand that what is very close to being passed in Idaho, in many states, are ideas in bills that would restrict fundamental ways in which we operate public institutions, schools, libraries, and increasingly universities. And so if you value intellectual exchange, it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that is in every book. It doesn't mean you have to agree with every opinion that is out there. It means that you believe in something bigger, fundamental principles about how individuals can live, thrive, be reflected in literature, and can learn about one another in schools. So please join us. You can find information on our recent report, some of our tracking that is specific to Utah on our website at pen.org, and lift up our new hashtag and join us in our new national effort to free the books. Thank you so much for being here on behalf of PEN.
Jonathan, I want to ask our audience to please, if you support the humanities, check out thc.utah.edu for upcoming Tanner Humanities events. Please support us. I want to thank you all for coming out here this afternoon, and please join me in thanking Azar Nafisi. Thank you.